Well, good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid, and I'm here with my UBI co-hosts and co-producers, Diana Blackwell and Enno Schmidt. For those of you who are maybe new to our show, Diana Blackwell is a Tenant Association president at Fred Samuel Houses in Central Harlem. She's a community activist and champion for Harlem residents and an avid UBI advocate. Universal Basic Income was something that she introduced to here on Community and Technology almost 2 years ago. Welcome, Diana.
Good evening, everyone.
And Enno Schmidt is also a co-producer of our UBI segment here on Community and Technology. Enno is the co-founder of the Basic Income Initiative at the referendum on basic income in Switzerland and author of the film Basic Income, A Cultural Impulse. And he is currently at the University of Freiburg in Germany, where he's helping to set up the Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies. Welcome back, Enno.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, we have two special guests. I'm going to ask Diana if she would introduce our first guest, Diana.
Oh, yes. Well, welcome again, Ruth Westcott. She is a visitor from Canada, has a great testimony, and we'll hear a little bit about it later.
Okay, I think Enno is going to introduce our other special guest for today, Enno.
Yeah, so this is Karl Widerquist. He is professor at Georgetown University in their campus in Qatar. And I met him first in Montreal in Canada at the Basic Income Earth Network World Congress in 2014. And the first what I did there then was to make an interview with him. And I think we can have a look to that interview as a brief one. And that gives a good insight on how energetic Karl is and what some of his favorite points for universal basic income are.
Hi, my name is Karl Widerquist. I grew up in Cassopolis, Michigan. I currently work at Georgetown University in their campus in Qatar. And I support basic income because I believe that no person on earth has the right to come between another person and the resources they need to survive. And that's what happens when we have private capital without paying a compensating basic income, is you take people and you give them, put them in a world where all of the natural resources have been made into someone else's private capital or public capital. And it's fine to do that. It's a good thing as long as you pay for it by paying back to the people with an unconditional basic income. Americans care about each other, and they care very much about freedom, and they need to come to realize that you don't have freedom without a basic income. Nobody asked the poor people to have all the resources of the earth given to somebody else as their private property. And because of that, people have to follow a bunch of rules that our native ancestors did not have to follow. That once the land was freely available to all, and now we say you can't do this, you can't do that, because someone else owns that land, and they own all the capital and all the resources of the earth, and we owe back to that, and we're taking away people's freedom if we don't do that. And that's the message that I think Americans need to understand. Unconditional basic income is one piece of the puzzle to build a truly free and democratic society. There is no freedom while you're forcing people to live in poverty. People who could get out of poverty if you just get out of their way and stop telling them they can't use the resources of the earth. They could build a great society for themselves. Instead, we're making them be homeless or live in shacks and shanties and take the worst jobs available. That's not freedom. And there's no democracy when people are completely under this threat all the time if they don't do what they're told by their social betters. I want to see the introduction of an unconditional basic income before the end of the year.
Okay then, you do it.
Well, that was the last wish in this interview. I want to see the introduction of a basic income this year. Karl, I heard you have been 15, in the age of 15, when you first heard about this idea in a TV show with Milton Friedman talking about free to choose. And that inspired you in the age of 15. And one sentence often heard from you is, basic income is the freedom to say no. So the free to choose what you really want to do, what you really want to build your life on, and the freedom to say no to bad conditions, to horrifying bosses, to a miserable life, and the freedom to say yes. My question to you is, what's for you the most inspiring and energetic point why you gave your life for this idea? You are arguing, you are studying, you are doing things for basic income since a very early life. What drives you?
Well, I think it's because I grew up with parents who were very concerned about justice and social justice. They were actually religious, and a lot of religious people in the United States are actually committed to hierarchy and no redistribution. But some religious people in the United States are actually very much believe that religion is about having a strong responsibility to the least advantage in your society. And I was raised that way, and I really came to internalize that belief. Now, it's maybe a little embarrassing to say I learned about it from Milton Friedman, because he didn't make these kind of arguments for it. But I saw this as a challenge to both left and right. If the right wing wants to simplify the welfare state, maybe have a basic income, but they want people to work. They claim that it's wrong to redistribute income unless people work. And the left are very often, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in the United States, wanted to make things consistent with this right-wing idea that people have to work. They thought they needed to do that to sell it. That's not so true anymore. And a reason I became so interested in basic income, I think, was partly because it is, if you really want to get rid of poverty, this is the way to do it. This is really the only program that can truly eliminate poverty. If you put conditions on whatever it is, whatever strategy you're using to reduce poverty, if it's conditional, there's always somebody who won't meet your conditions. And in that case, you're using poverty, homelessness, and economic destitution as an incentive to get people to meet your conditions. So you actually, and not only, you're not really fully trying to eliminate poverty. You might be trying to reduce it, but you always want to have it there in order to give people the incentive to meet your conditions. And that just seems to me to be wrong. Just seems to me to be wrong to put people in such a use poverty in this way. And that, of course, connects with the freedom argument that I was making in this video, in this video interview, that when you do that to someone, you are making them profoundly unfree. People who have access to resources naturally have the power to say no to other people who might want to get them to do something. If somebody is a subsistence farmer or a hunter or a fisher, they can make their own living as they want, and they can work for you if you make it worth their while. But what we have collectively done as a society is that we have taken this power away from the lower classes and really the middle classes. We've taken this power away by saying everyone else owns the resources, and the only thing that's real work is working for somebody who has the property that they can pay you to work. You can't start your own cooperative. You can't start your own firm. You can't start your own farm or you can't fish for a living or hunt and gather for a living. All of this puts you in a position where you're destitute if you don't do what you're told. And that's a horrible way to use poverty. That's why it's so important to me in my life.
Well, we are always talking about those values, freedom, dignity, and what you said now. And I would like to ask that question to come closer to the core. And it's really a question. So we are always arguing in this way. And you mentioned religion. What is the reason why people deserve to be more free, to be not enslaved to follow up the conditions others are putting on them? Why is that?
Well, I think you have to start with a basic belief in human equality, that all people have equal moral worth. And I really don't waste any time arguing for that, arguing why we should all respect that there's basic equal moral worth for all people. Some philosophers do, and I think what they're trying to do is write philosophy for psychopaths. A psychopath has no empathy, no sympathy for other human beings, and there's no talking them into it. So I simply start with that premise, and that this anybody that has a conscience at least starts with the idea that at least some other people have human value. They might be a racist or sexist and think they want to exclude some groups from that. But most people with a conscience are going to see, yes, everybody has moral value. And if I respect the moral value of other people, I should impose as little on them as possible. If I want to create a project, I can invite them to join me. But to impose a project on everybody, whether the project is called International Global Capitalism or it's called the United States of America or whatever that project is, we shouldn't be imposing that on people. We should be inviting them to join us and say, okay, we've used resources for things that are going to make it impossible for you to simply work on your own. So to preserve your freedom and to really treat you as an equal with value, a person who's treated with equal value and is invited to join our joint project, but is not forced to, we've got to have a basic income, and that basic income has to be high enough for you to live on.
Well, equality is such a word. I'm just wondering, we share that values. We have it written in the Constitution, in particular you in the United States, the equality, basic human rights, but it does not happen. So that is my wondering. Maybe there's no answer, but it's obvious that an unconditional basic income is giving the right to live to the people. So the right to live is not in the air, it's on the ground, it's economic basis. And it does not happen. And people are telling you that people has to function, people has to work, whatever, to get the right to live. And it's not given by the human being itself. So that's just, I'm wondering about that.
Well, but yeah. Oh, well, that I can answer. Is that when we think of freedom, basically in the entire Western world, but especially in the United States, we tend to think of the freedom of property owners. And the more property you have, the more we're concerned about their freedom. So about a little more, maybe closer to 10 years ago now, during the Obama administration, there was an issue about whether your employer could refuse to cover birth control and abortion as part of your healthcare coverage, which most healthcare coverage will just include that at all. And employers pay for people's healthcare coverage. And what this was presented as some idea of the freedom of the owner of these companies to decide whether they're going to pay for healthcare coverage or not. And Obama, I think, unfortunately defended it. Look, it's not about freedom. This is about healthcare and about access to healthcare. He should have said, you're right, this is about religious freedom. This is about religious freedom. It's not about it is what you're, and it's about whether the religious freedom goes, whether the owner of a company should have the religious freedom to force all of their employees to follow their the owner's religious belief, or whether you, the employee, has the freedom to follow your own religious beliefs. That's what that issue about. It was religious freedom on both sides, and it was portrayed as if it was healthcare versus religious freedom. That's not the way to do it. And we do it in the same way We do it in the same way when we're talking about the redistribution of income. Oh, when you redistribute income, they say, oh, you're taking away from the freedom of the owners and you're giving it for opportunity for these low-income people. That's nice that you want to give low-income people opportunity, but freedom's more important. We got to leave the money with the rich people. And we don't notice that we took away the freedom of poor people.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that,
when we privatized all of the nation's earth, there is no poverty in societies that have common resources. Poverty is when you don't have enough money to buy the resources you need to thrive.
Right,
and lots of countries, for most of history, humans did not have poverty. They might not have lived well, but they had access to the resources they needed to survive, whether it was on a farm or whether it was hunting. And we've taken that freedom away, but we don't think about that. Our starting point, we make our starting point, oh, all the rich people own all the stuff. Now let's talk about freedom, and let's forget anything that happens.
Right. And that can make clear how absurd the conception of freedom is misused by some people. How really crazy. Polly, hello. And Diana, you raised your hand.
Yes. When you were speaking of projects, I was concerned because when we're talking about projects, we're maybe talking about a job or a work of some form. But how does that play when there's a reduction of jobs due to automation and there is no place for them to go? What do you say to those people?
Well, so far, there's a lot of, so far, this has not yet happened. That there have been automation has been going on for hundreds of years, and so far it has always led to more jobs. And there's a great fear that sooner or later it's going to lead to fewer jobs as they automate away just about everything humans can do. And I am not concerned about that argument for basic income very much, because it gives people ammunition to say, oh, well, when that happens, then we'll have basic income. But I'm talking about here now. Well, there are a lot of reasons based on what you just said to have basic income. We've had for the last 50 years, our economy has more than doubled in size, thanks to automation and technological increase and other things. And all of us have shared in it. All of us has done some of the work that's made all of that possible. But yet, very few of us have had a raise because of that. Almost all of the gain in the last 50 years has gone to the top 1 or 2%. Most of the rest of us are slightly better off, if at all, than our parents or grandparents were 2 generations ago. So automation, we need to have basic income because we haven't had share in the automation. We used to get a share for the past 100 years. Before that, living standards went up with productivity. And in the 1970s, they simply stopped keeping pace. Another reason for automation is even if we don't automate all the jobs away, automation constantly is disruptive. I supposedly somewhere in my ancestry had a wagon wheel manufacturer. This is a story my family tells, and he wouldn't change to making car wheels, and he lost his business. Well, there were lots of wheels. Yeah, a lot of wagon wheel manufacturers and blacksmiths went out of business in those days, but there were a lot more jobs opening up. However, even if more jobs open up, you are taking away the livelihood of people who have built their lives around this set of skills. They're trying to play the game the way they say they do. Go to school, learn a trade, get in a business, and then suddenly like your skills aren't needed and you go to the bottom. And that has been happening with automation since the Luddites were complaining about it. The Luddites were not crazy people who were against technology. These were people who had skilled jobs and then were going to lose those skilled jobs and go down to the bottom of the labor market. And that is why one of the reasons we need basic income to cushion people against this constant churning that automation is doing.
Right. And work will change. So we have to rethink what work is. Work is not what can be automated. Work for people, for human beings, is not that what machines can take over. And we have to understand that there's a shift, not only in technology, but also in our understanding what work is, which is much more in the future interpersonal work, work with people, with nature, with all those things that cannot be rationalized and and digitized. That we have to rethink that work is not payment. Work is not market in the same way we have had it in the last century. And skills are not those who are educated at universities, sorry for that, but much more in life and in relationship. It has much more to do with a new understanding also and focus on what skills are really needed. So we have to rethink, and that is why basic income is so important, because it gives the floor of an unconditional appreciation for each other, and it gives the freedom to educate yourself, to look what is important around you, what is important for the world, what's important for me, myself. And there's another quote I like very much from you, Karl, that says, it does not judge you. This income does not say whether you are nice or ugly, whether you are rich or poor, what your parents are, where you are living, what your gender is. Nothing. This income is just given and not judging you and not putting you in some box. So next question for me to you, Karl, is you studied the whole development of basic income from the, I don't know, 70s, the huge experiments in the United States in the 70s, then in Canada, and recently and currently we have a lot of new pilot projects in the United States, and we have had that huge project that was cancelled in Canada. So can you give a brief overview also for the audience, how it grows, what happened, it came up, it went down and came up again, and where we are now?
Yeah, well, I tell people that right now we are in the third wave of the basic income movement. That it's been going up and down for a long time, and this now is essentially the third wave. It was the earliest statement of we have something that's really close to a basic income is Thomas Paine, which is not Thomas Paine in his book Agrarian Justice. Argued for something similar to a basic income, but not quite. But in response to Thomas Paine, a much lesser known figure named Thomas Spence actually, as far as we know, invented the basic income. However, that was fairly obscure and very few people knew about it. So for the next 150 years, lots of people were reinventing it without having heard about it. The most recent scholar I know who had to reinvent it was Philippe van Parijs, who reinvented it about the same time that I saw Milton Friedman's speech in 1980. But it had a little bit of a wave of support in the early 20th century when some followers of Henry George became for it. There was something called a state bonus movement in the UK. A man named Major Douglas, also in the UK, was arguing for a national dividend. A man named Huey Long in Louisiana, the governor and senator in Louisiana, was preparing to run for president on a share the wealth campaign, which was essentially a basic income. And a group of academics, mostly in the UK, started talking about it. But then at the end of World War II, people agreed to improve the welfare system, but on a conditional basis. And so talk of basic income fell off for a few decades. But in the 1960s, people were realizing that the welfare system had a lot of cracks in it, at least in the United States and Canada. People were realizing this, and they were looking for different things. How do we improve it? How can we expand it? How can we improve it under the Johnson administration, especially in the United States? And a lot of people at that time started looking at basic income or other variants of it, such as the negative income tax. And suddenly there was a big explosion of it. And it wasn't just policy wonks doing it, but was also part of the national welfare rights movement was interested in this idea. It got all the way up to Martin Luther King endorsed the idea. And it looked like it was just about to happen, but they got a very watered down bill in the United States. And even the watered down bill couldn't pass. It sort of fell into the cracks between people who wanted less and people who wanted more. Now we got some side benefits at that time. We got 5 experiments that were conducted in the US and Canada and we got the increased earned income tax credit, which has some similarity to basic income, but not much, and increased food stamps, which is like a conditional basic income. And Alaska actually introduced what is a small basic income. But interest in the US and a lot of places dropped off in the 1980s when people like Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the United States taught people that there's a lot of political hay to be made, not by improving the welfare system, but by demonizing everybody who's eligible for welfare, tell them they're all really cheats because there's probably jobs for everyone and all of them should be suspect. These people dominated the rhetoric and talked about the value of work, and people who are left of center were very often, well, then we've got to make everything work with a work ethic. We got to make sure everybody works for everything. That's the only way to get anything passed. That never succeeded from getting everything cut. But we went through many years of cuts. While luckily in Europe, when it died down in the US, its interest in various spots in Europe started to come up. And academics got interested and more academics got involved. And it was actually slowly increasing from the mid-1980s, this academic discussion with some activists getting involved. And this was growing and growing. And by the early 2000s, it had grown a lot. It was hard to tell that it had, because there was not a big discussion, but there was a wider discussion, more places around the world. It was never big anywhere. Well, for brief moments, briefly in the Netherlands, briefly in Denmark, briefly in South Africa, very brief. But then in the last 10 years, one thing after another, since the Great Recession, has gotten people's attention to basic income, and really from so many different quarters and so many different countries, all around the world, that it's done nothing but grow for the last 10 or 15 years. And there are a bunch of people that never noticed that because it didn't reach their radar screen. But it has really grown. And I think that makes this the third and largest and most widespread wave of support basic income has had. And will this be the one that crashes over the sand and gives us a basic income, at least in some country? I don't know, but that's what we're working for.
Well, but the situation now is different. So in my experience, it was the beginning of the 21st century, and this is the most beautiful vision and idea of the 21st century. And now we have COVID-19 pandemic. And now the voices are saying, well, now we need basic income. And you have this subsidies in the United States, and there are crises all over. And people are looking for basic income. For me, it has two sides. So the one side is, okay, that's fine that people are demanding basic income now, and it's on the broader level also in politics. On the other side, my concern is now this is just for need. Now this is not freedom. This is not for individual human being, but this is for emergency. So this is giving the people money, controlling people, getting people out of jobs, and because they have no jobs. So this is a need measure. This is not the progress of civilization and rights, but this is pushed down for just helping the poor, and then they are poor. So basic income is not much. What do you say about that big wave that came with the pandemic in many countries for demanding we need a basic income? What do you think?
Yeah. As I was saying, one thing after another has propelled basic income. The Great Recession did. National Black Movement for Black Lives endorsed the idea. The Occupy movement endorsed the idea. Climate change activists were endorsing it at this time. Automation people were endorsing it. Then you get this Andrew Yang guy who comes up, runs for president on a basic income platform, and really gets the name of basic income out there to a lot of people that hadn't heard of it before. And just at the same time when he suspended his campaign, COVID hit, and we started talking about basic income as a response to COVID. And it was a perfect time to do it, because the normal arguments that people use against it, nobody will work well, we don't need everybody, or not enough people to work. We don't need everybody to work. We're telling people not to work, and we don't have jobs for everybody at that time. So that argument doesn't hold. Then the argument that we can't afford it. Well, actually, during a recession, what you need is for the government to pump money into the economy. Usually they do that by buying back debt from rich people. It gives a lot of rich people money, which they might not even spend. The best way to pump money into the economy is with a basic income. Give it to everyone. And so the least advantaged get it and they will spend it. So this argument that we couldn't afford it or it would discourage work or that people don't deserve it, clearly people have wanted to work. They didn't all just quit their jobs. 30% of the country didn't quit their jobs right after COVID. They got laid off. These arguments don't fit. And so this gave a big momentum to the basic income movement. And we got something like a basic income on a temporary basis, but it opened the door and people talked about the connection between this and basic income during this recession. Whereas last time they had, during the 2008 recession and the 2001 recession, there were small stimulus payments, but nobody then in the mainstream media was talking about the connection between those and basic income. Now you couldn't get away from it. So COVID has really furthered the visibility of basic income and then the political viability of it as a policy option in the near future.
Wow. Okay. Let me just interject for a moment here. This is WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Community and Technology with a special UBI edition with my co-producers, Diana Blackwell and Enno Schmidt, and special guests, Karl Widerquist, Ruth Westcott, and Polly Spain. I wanted to bring in Polly and Diana. They had a few questions and insights regarding, I think, Polly, you had some questions about the G7 and what is the international take right now on basic income. Polly, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yes, I had put it in the chat, and my question is, what is the position of the G7 regarding basic income?
I don't think that the G7 has ever made a collective statement on basic income. And most of the top leaders are opposed to it, still clinging to this idea that we need conditional programs. Basic income has been endorsed, and that's been true. That wasn't true in the United States in the 60s and 70s. A lot of mainstream politicians were for it or some version of it, including in 72. Both McGovern and Nixon were for different versions of it. McGovern's was more real. As you might expect. But since then it's fallen out in the United States and in most countries. The top politicians usually aren't. A lot of small parties are, but some of those small parties are, it's spreading around. There are people at least in the Labour Party in the UK and in both of the major parties in Canada are interested in basic income. In the United States, more and more people actually within the Democratic Party are involved. I think about 10 years ago, we couldn't find anybody. Well, okay, we found 2 people in Congress back in 2006 who would endorse a bill for basic income. Now we've got a lot of people in Congress who say, yeah, this is the direction we need to be looking. So it's getting into the main parties, but as far as getting to the point where like the G7 is gonna even take a stand on it, we're still a ways from that.
But even Russia, so it's interesting that Medvedev, who was president in this interim time, president of Russia, after and before Putin, and he was very close to Putin, he suggested a basic income, unconditional basic income. Not precisely what we are talking about, but in that direction. They know about it, and I think this is a test. So if that guy is talking about an unconditional basic income, then the government wants to see how the reactions are. And so also in Russia, they know, obviously, they know the idea in the government. The people don't know that. I was in Moscow and it's totally unknown for the people, but I think the government knows it. And for me, this is like the idea of democracy. or human rights or right to vote for women. This will come because this is progress of human being and civilization. But yeah, it comes slowly, but everywhere.
Yeah, in order to make it come, you got to get people past the idea that it's okay to give money to people even if they don't work. And the way and a lot of people will defend that position by saying, well, okay, yeah, we give money to them, but look at all the other good things basic income does. Whereas I always counterattack on that point. If you're not doing that, you're using poverty to get the poor, the threat of poverty to get the poor to do what you want them to do. That's a horrible way to get another human being to do what you want them to do.
But that's a powerful perspective, though, Karl.
Ideas, we get somewhere.
That's a powerful perspective. What you just said, the way that poverty is used to get people to do what you want them to do. That's a powerful insight. I hadn't quite heard UBI talked about it in that way until you did today. And to me, that's a powerful insight. Oh,
that's something that the slaves knew that when they were freed. There was, the famous story of 40 acres and the mule, though the backstory to that is there was a meeting between freed slaves and General Sherman in Charleston, South Carolina, and their spokesman, Garrison Frazier, they asked him, what do you need to protect your freedom? And he said, we need land so we can till it on our own and not be answerable to the former masters. I can't remember the exact quote. It's a great quote. He understood that if you don't have access to resources yourself, you're going to just end up working for the people who own them, which were the plantation owners, the same plantation owners. And that's why they asked for 40 acres and a mule. And it's exactly why they didn't get it, because the entire country, the textile manufacturers in the North and the former slave owners in the South wanted a subservient workforce that would do the cotton picking. And you don't get that with when everybody's got 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
And that's the reason why you can argue what you want and listen to the arguments against. That's mostly bullshit. The only point is people don't want to give unconditional awareness, love, money, the right to live to others. You need the poor, you want the power. We have the slavery, it's existing, it's not a specific thing from the United States, it's power over others, forcing people to do what you want them to do. And for that you need poverty, you need dependency and unconditionality. That's the point. It's not the point how to finance. That's all not interesting because that's not the issue. The issue is this: overcome your inner blockade to give unconditional trust, unconditional awareness, and to fulfill what's already written in the Constitution.
Yeah, I agree. And the way the rhetoric works, really what we're doing when we have these conditions that everybody has to meet before they can get any help from the government, and that means putting every able-bodied person in this position where they have to work. That's benefiting employers who want to pay really low wages. It's not benefiting employers who are willing to pay high wages, and it's not benefiting workers, but they sell it as if this is somehow beneficial to workers. They will tell the middle class or the people who are doing what they're told, look, these lazy people who don't want to do jobs the way you do jobs, they're the ones who want it from this money. It's you versus them. When actually they don't see that they would have what we need to be selling the people who think of themselves as middle class. Very often they're working class or lower class. We need to be selling these people that the leverage they get by getting into solidarity with the least off is going to be ultimately better for them. They're going to get higher wages and better working conditions because they have the power to say no as long with the least advantage. And of course, in the United States, what I just said about class is very racially based. Usually when they're appealing to those middle class workers, they mean
white people with jobs, and they're trying to scare them with this idea of the mythological lazy black welfare queen.
Diana, you wanted to jump in with something?
Yes, Karl, I want to go back to something you had said a little while ago. You were speaking about growth, and you were speaking about growth in the United States, the movement. Can you kind of explain what the difference between guaranteed income versus UBI, because the growth is not so much under UBI umbrella, it's under guaranteed income, and it's targeting certain groups like those that are like extremely low income. So can you speak on that?
Yeah, well, these terms, the problem with these terms is that they're used by different people in different ways. And that creates a lot of confusion. Targeted policies are very different than what we're talking about. Targeted policies is the traditional approach that we've had since the poor laws of the first Elizabethan period in the UK, at least, targeting these various groups. And the idea of basic income or the programs that are like it is to get rid of targeting and try to get income to everybody. If you're trying to make sure that everybody has at least enough money to live on, there are two ways to do it. You can either give an income to everybody regardless of whatever else they make, and then you can tax them on what they make or what they spend to order to get the taxes that you need, but you give the money to everyone regardless of whether you have it. That's the way Social Security works. Social Security works like a basic income for old people who are eligible, and everybody gets it regardless of how much other money you make. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the country, gets his Social Security check every week or every month, whenever they come out, and that works like a basic income. That, I think, is the best way, because then it's always there. Mm-hmm. Now, it's always there. If your job is gone, you don't have to apply, you don't have to call somebody, you have your basic income coming in. If your husband becomes abusive and you have to leave your husband, you don't have to explain to some authority, oh no, I'm not part of that big high income 2-earner family anymore. I'm a woman on my own. Your basic income is already going to your own account. That's why I like basic income. Its closest cousin is what we usually call the negative income tax. And what that does is that it makes sure that there's a floor under everybody's income, but it only gives the money to the people who need it. And then it phases it out as the income goes up. I think that could be a very good policy, but it's actually administratively more difficult than basic income. And the way it's difficult hurts the least advantage. If you had a basic income for everybody at billionaires, the people who would be most likely not to get it would be homeless people who don't have time to prove they're not billionaires. And so you have something like a negative income tax. The people who need it most are going to miss out on it when they need it most. And even though it's got a lot of advantages, basic income is a better way to go.
You know?
Well, I would like to say one word, because Karl mentioned Mr. Buffett, Warren Buffett, and he said there's a fight between the poor and the rich and the poor, and the rich win. And I think that was not just cynical.
Yeah.
And that's important for me for that reason, like Karl said, why unconditional universal means for everybody. Because as long as we are thinking in class struggle, so against those are the nasty, evil rich one, or those are the lazy, stupid, poor one. As long as we split the society, that there is nothing else possible than the poor lose, the rich win. Even if the rich don't want it, they win. Because they win. If there is a decision between, then the rich are stronger and the poor are always, you can argue for the poor, you can fight against property, everything, you can do what you want. It's weak, it's weaker than the rich. And that is for me one important value of UBI, that it ends up with the division in rich and poor and in classes, different levels. That this doesn't matter. And I know people, I also know very rich people and very powerful people. And I can tell you, and I know people really desperate, in need, and mental ill and homeless and all that stuff. I know all of them. And I can tell you, they are good people at every level, and bad also at every level. So this ideology that we are always divided, that there are always the good, that's mostly me and my friends, and the bad one who are different. This split of society creates the growth of wealth on the one side and poverty on the other side, in combination with capital and machines and so on. There are many reasons, but this is for me one important point of the UBI, to unite people in human beings, equality for everybody. This is the basis of our society. Then after that, we are free, we are different, we like each other or like each other not. And you will see this point is, you see how important it is, because whether people are poor or rich, also for very poor people, it is so difficult to say, okay, unconditional given for those I really don't like, for those I hate, it's given to them too. So, and then you see at what level ever you are, how difficult it is for everybody to accept a universal unconditional basic income. This is not an issue for the poor or for the rich or the middle class or whatever. This is an issue for everybody, and you see it and you feel it by yourself. So you have to overcome this blockade that you are against those and they shouldn't get it and they deserve to be pushed out or whatever. It is for everybody, and that is a challenge and the task we have to overcome. So this is a development to an unconditional basic income, not how to get the money. The money is already there. We have more money than we need, and that causes so many disasters, because money is looking for investments, for getting interest, and that makes the investments that destroy the world. So it's not the issue that there's too less money. Money is not a natural resource. Money is a right, and we can create money as much as we want and need, but people are not told about that. So to get the power on the side of the world, see, that is, that's what I want to say. And I think this sentence from Warren Buffett is very intelligent, because what he's saying really is, for me, as long as there is a fight, from what side ever, as long the rich are winning and the poor are losing, this is like faith. It cannot be different.
Yeah, Ruth, you want to chime in? Ruth Westcott. Unmute yourself, Ruthie.
Oh, I'm loving this philosophical conversation. It's so important and it's so profound. And I'm just so glad Diana invited me, because I want to say how, I had that experience of restoration of my dignity when I was in the basic income pilot in Ontario recently, after being really harmed by the state for the 30 years before that, when I was on social assistance, which is a horrible idea. It's like Indian residential schools are a horrible idea and they can't be fixed. We have to abolish them. But basic income is an idea that, when it's done right, when it's done well, and the devil's in the details, right, Karl?
Yeah.
You can eradicate the stigma that we experienced and that harms us so profoundly, and that's what happened. That's what happened. I mean, part of it. So I'm talking about coming from experience of being on a disability income in Ontario, and so you had to jump through 75 hoops. Well, there are 800 rules actually, but you had to jump through a lot of hoops to prove that you were incapable of enough things to be eligible for your livelihood. And then, whether it's conscious or unconscious, I believe that human beings have to stay consistent to the narrative of who they think they are, right? I mean, like if you believe that you have to be disabled to get this money, you're going to stay sick or disabled. Like you're going to fulfill that prophecy, and I did, and so did everybody I know. only we got worse. We got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse the deeper our poverty got. And I saw that miraculously reverse, and people got better in the basic income pilot, and it happened fast. And it was amazing. And I talked to Evelyn Forget about why. And she said, well, why do you think, Ruth, why do you think that happened? And I really didn't know, but I knew that, there's like a lot of trauma in my background. And I had just started to hear about the research from CDC, Kaiser Permanente, about adverse childhood events from 95, 97, that was talking about, how kids who go through terrible stuff are much more likely to become alcoholics like I had become. And, they always talk about the rate of addiction in people on social assistance, but I'm not sure it's our fault. I mean, maybe, I'm sober now, 30 years, but it says my responsibility to get better, but I think I came by that honestly. And that study said, we were like 400 times more likely, if we had high adverse childhood event scores, to get depressive illness. And we were 1,200 times more likely to attempt suicide. Like, this is then on all the chronic physical health issues, we're many times more likely to get them as well. And so when you make that connection between trauma in early life and developing all the diagnoses that you need to get on disability in Ontario, I think you need to make that connection, because we know what the most powerful social determinant of health is. And it's not assets, and it's not education. It's income, baby. It's income. And so when we give people as adults this, enough money, we got up to the poverty line. I was making $1,915 a month, which was very close in 2017 to what the poverty line in Ontario was. And my health improved to the extent that I was able to go to work full time after not being able to for a long time. Now there's more to the story, and I can get into the details and the nuances another day, but it really shouldn't be surprising that happened, and I'm not the only one that it happened to. The conservatives always said, people are going to stay home, and the opposite happened, right? It unleashed potential because we have a security. And Evelyn said, I said, eventually said to Evelyn Forget, who you may know analyzed the data on the basic income experiment in Manitoba from the 1970s. I'm sure you all know about that. And I said, well, medicine couldn't really help me. And, neither could psychiatry, and jail sure as hell doesn't help anybody with these, these problems that were born in an adverse childhood. But security helped me. And no wonder security is the medicine for problems born in the insecurity of an adverse childhood. That's what I think.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we're going to realize, that all of this child poverty is a side effect of our strategy to get low-income people to accept whatever jobs are out there. We could get rid of child poverty if we were just to accept this is more important. It's more important that no child grows up in poverty than it is to make sure that every adult accepts whatever jobs are available at the going wage and going working conditions. Maybe they'll demand better wages and working conditions, and then, but we want them to accept jobs so bad that we're willing to make all of these children, millions and millions of children, grow up in poverty, when we say, oh, we don't want to do that at all. And these children, these children are costly. So the costs that they bear from that are costly to them and to society for the rest of their lives. And we really won't admit that this is what they were doing, but there is no way that you can eliminate child poverty without eliminating the poverty of parents.
Okay, guys and ladies, we're just about out of time. Any final comments? Want to go around? We got about 3 minutes left. Polly, have any final comments?
Yeah, I was going to speak to the issue of poverty because I did a podcast on poverty as an industry. And when I was listening to Ruth as an educator, et cetera, you know, I deal with that every day with young people who pretend to be disabled so that they can survive off of a disability check. So I just want to say thank you, Karl, and to Ruth and to everyone, because it's very important, again, for us to advocate for basic income for everyone, and hopefully more people will embrace it.
Okay, Enno, any final comments, Enno?
Oh, you're muted, Enno.
You're muted.
Sorry. I think such a discussion makes clear that we need more time to talk about that. We need more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there are so many interesting things. It would be so interesting for me now to come to pilot projects in regard, and Polly could say something, and Ruth can say something again. And Karl, I know you wrote a book about it, and why pilot projects are not always the best thing, and I'm thinking the same. So there are so many things, I guess, we should talk about and then come to action.
Yeah.
Polly, right?
Yes.
Come to action.
Yeah.
Always, I'm an action person.
I agree.
Let's do
I
this
agree.
again
Why don't we
soon.
get the same group together
Yes.
for a future episode and take where we left off, and then just spend the whole hour talking about experiments and pilot projects. And
Well, that would be good. Good tip.
Let's do that. Diana,
Good to
close
hear
us out, Diana. Final
I
word.
just want to say thank you, everyone. Thank you, Enno, for bringing Karl our way, and returning Ruth. Thank you. And of course, you, Stu, and Polly. Thank you. Just to say thank you.
Okay.
Ruth,
thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let's do it again soon. This has been Community and
right.
Technology, Universal or Unconditional Basic Income, with Diana Blackwell and Enno Schmidt and Polly Spain, my co-producers. Special guests, Ruth Westcott and Karl Widerquist. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned next week for more from Community and Technology, WHCR 90.3 FM.
thanks.
Okay. Good night, all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.